It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
Hey guys, how is it going? And welcome to the Morning Star Drive on 117.8. It is Thursday, August 24th, and so happy for you joining us. We are ready to start another day together with the Lord. So subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on SoundCloud, and make sure to support us on Patreon. Today we have an exciting podcast for you. We have sermons in the sky, the Q&A word study, and of course commentaries, updates, and news on what is happening around the world in this history today. All right, everyone, how are you doing? Yes, it is Thursday. We are closing in on Friday. Super happy about this. The weekend is almost here. If you haven't yet, go ahead, leave a like and comment to build our community. Super happy for everyone joining us every weekday on the Morning Star Drive. So let's get up and support each other each and every day. This week's Sunday message title, Learn from Me, Be Perfect like God, and those who speak and act without checking. If you don't stop, all the harm will go back to you. All right. So yes, it is Thursday. How was your Wednesday service last night? I hope you received a ton of grace from the message. Make sure to give feedback and encouragement to your preachers who are doing such an amazing job. For me, I am very, very happy as I am actually super happy getting all these questions and people are asking things that people would find a little bit more sensitive, like sensitive topics like tithing. And I think it's something that's important that we can all talk about. And it's really important we have a place to ask these questions or at least learn why we should do such things. Like I would rather have people ask all the questions regardless of how small or petty they might be or they might be in your eyes. But it's better than keeping it in or maybe even having some type of misunderstanding. And sometimes people just never had the proper explanation, right? So I am super thankful that you guys are all publicly posting your questions. I think it's great you're doing it. And sometimes please forgive me if I ever sound rude or sound like I am not polite with my answers. My intention is not to be like that. And especially like a topic when it comes like tithing. Like tithing, it could be very sensitive because it has to do with money. And I don't want to sound like I'm like tithe shaming you. You don't give tithe? Oh my good. Like I don't want to sound like that. I don't even want to sound condescending or anything along that line. But if I ever have, and no one's written me about this, so I'm just kind of just in case saying this ahead of time. So hopefully it is something that you guys can forgive me for, right? So yeah, I'm thankful. Just the questions I get, whether it's emails, DMs on my Instagram, or here on the comments, I am super thankful. And I do think one of the good things about doing it in public is when you ask a sensitive question in public, it allows other people, it empowers them to feel like, oh, there is no question that's too sensitive. Oh, they asked this question. Wow, it's done in public. Maybe I should ask this question too. So I do think doing it in public in the comment section actually empowers others who may be a little bit shy or afraid to ask to, actually post it. And many people will benefit from it, not just one, right? So, I was watching news yesterday, of course, news on YouTube, and it was talking about the new studies that are done on screen time for little children. And I thought this was interesting because it was like screen time for 1-year-olds. So you're like, wow, is there a lot of screen time for 1-year-olds? However, there are enough these days in this generation. And the studies came out is the more screen time young babies have, the more developmental delays they experience. So if you're having a lot of screen time at 1 year old, you're going to have a lot of developmental delays from 2 to 4 years old when it comes to communication and problem solving. So that is quite interesting, right? And it's not just this one study. Other studies are showing the same thing. The more screen time, the more developmental problems a child or a baby is actually going to have. Now, there's one caveat. The one caveat is you can reduce the problem. So it's not like getting rid of the problems. Everything's better to do in person, but you will reduce problems of developmental, these developmental problems if the screen time is educational screen time, right? So it's not saying it's like, oh, this is way better. No, it's just saying it reduces problems. So it's not saying that it's not a problem, but at least if they're going to have screen time, if you show them educational screen time, it will reduce the problem. So the focus should be more about, in this day and age, it's very, very hard to like have zero screen time, right? However, the focus should be more about the quality of the screen time if you can't help but show them something on the screen. So I found that to be very, very interesting. There's also a comment that was given by someone in Korea. I'm not sure exactly who it is because the YouTube name is kind of one of those random names. It's like WCJ457, like whatever those names is. But they said that there's like a new Chief Justice in Korea. Right? So I went to go look in the articles to see what this actually was. So those of you guys don't know, the system in Korea, they have like, the Chief Justice is a Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's the head of it, right? And what happens in Korea is each of these people have a 6-year term. And the really interesting thing is the 6-year term is up next month for the Chief Justice, which is September 24th. And a new Chief Justice is coming in. But I just thought it was very interesting how 2023 has a new Chief Justice coming in of the Supreme Court, where this person would be the person that presides like over Sunsim's trial too. So I was looking into who this person was. Okay. So this person is nominated by the president of South Korea, and his name is, he's already a judge. Obviously, you need to be experienced, but his name is Lee Kyun-young, right? And he is nominated for the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And what they said about him is this person, what's his experience? This person for over 30 years has been dedicated to the field of judicature or administration of justice and legal research. And he's acknowledged by his rulings in advancing the rights of people with disabilities and has championed the protection of workers' rights. Okay. Now, this new Chief Justice nominee, currently a judge at the Seoul High Court, will replace outgoing Chief Justice Kim Myung-soo, whose 6-year term is set to end on September 24th. Okay. Now, they said that based on his extensive judicial experience, he is expected to be listening to diverse voices in society and commit himself to principles, justice, and common sense to lead the country's judiciary as a Chief Justice. Okay? Now, of course, his appointment is subject to parliamentary confirmation hearings, followed by a vote during a plenary session. Okay, so this person, he went to Seoul National University School of Law, served as a judge at various courts, including the Seoul Central District Court and the Gwangju High Court. And if he is confirmed, he would be the second Supreme Court Chief Justice who has no experience of serving as a justice at the top court like his predecessor. Okay, so this is very interesting. This is what Lee really wants to do. And this is what Lee actually was quoted of saying. So in his contribution piece to a local lawyers magazine in 2022, this is what this new nominated Chief Justice said. He said, "Trust in the judiciary has plummeted and the authority of the courts has eroded to the point of becoming a subject of mockery." And he also said the credibility of the legal process has been compromised and doubts now surround the integrity of trials, right? So you can see that he is, it looks like, this is what he wrote about last year, but it really looks like he wants to clean up the judicial process, which is something that we, as in Providence, knowing what we've been through, are also very, very ecstatic about. So it's very interesting what he said. We don't know if he's actually going to do it, but it's very interesting that this is all happening in 2023. And this is all switching right before, Sunsim is going to be, this is like preparing him for the Supreme Court. So Sunsim's not going to be going with someone else who may be biased or may not be thinking about the judicial system being kind of biased and such, or like he basically said, it's a mockery. So when you look at those words, it kind of makes you think that this guy really wants to do something great and change the judicial process. So this is something we can pray for, guys. this new Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, he could be the one that sits and judges Sunsteam's Supreme Court lawsuit, right? So I am hoping that this is a great sign, that even if it reaches the Supreme Court, that this person will be very, very fair, understanding, and will be able to take this case and give it absolute justice. So that is something we can pray for, guys. That's something very, very interesting. Also, remember I told you guys on, was it Tuesday, about there's that Instagram slandering site that was talking about the lawsuits coming up in certain countries, and also that one country has already been sued, like a lawsuit's already been made. So I went to go look into this, and I saw that it is kind of true, but not true at the same time, right? So I'm not going to tell you the countries, because the country that actually has this full lawsuit, it's not a full lawsuit actually, but and I saw the letter itself that was sent to the church. And the letter is not a lawsuit. It is not filed, but it is more of an intent to sue, right? And for myself, I don't know much about law. So I wanted to get some lawyers to take a look at the letter against the church. And there were, like, when they read it, they had some things about the letter that they noticed. Right. So number one, guys, lawsuit has not been filed. So like the Instagram says that, oh, the first lawsuit's already out, and the answer is it's not. Right. It hasn't been filed. It's just a letter sent to the church. So no lawsuits. It's a letter that was sent to the church from the complainant. Right. The second thing they noticed was they said the letter wasn't written by a lawyer. Right. Because the lawyers were telling me that the letter was missing key pieces of information that is basic in any lawsuit, so it wasn't written by a lawyer. The third thing that they noticed, that they told me, was the chances of the lawsuit and the way that it's written has little or zero chance of having a case, right? And these are just from the 2-3 lawyers that I talked to when the letter was shown to them. So there's a couple things that we looked at and say, this is what's going on. So I'm just kind of updating you guys, because I did take a look into it. It is true that a letter has been sent to a church with intent, right? With intent. It seems like it's a threat to do a lawsuit, but it hasn't been filed, so it's not a real lawsuit yet, right? And and if I were just to give my personal opinion, like, this is my personal thoughts on this. So remember, I'm not in leadership of any church in the world. I am just an observer, and I'm someone who's just, who's doing this podcast. I used to be a leader, but not anymore, right? Am I still a pastor? I don't know, to be honest, right? Maybe I could be the pastor of internet ministry. I don't know. But from my personal opinion, so this is not about anything. I didn't talk to any leaders about what they're going to do about this. If it was me, though, I would strike back hard. That's my personal opinion. Like, really hard, to the point that it would become an example for others, for other people in other countries around the world not to even try the same thing. Like, that first one would be the example. Like, I would spend good money on the best lawyers and even get into a counter lawsuit to make sure that they would never consider doing this again. Right? Like a counter lawsuit on slander, libel, whatever it is, that lawyer would come up with. That's something I would do, right? Just to send a strong point. Now, why do I feel this way? Because after seeing the protests and how Providence is standing up for themselves in Korea and such, I just really feel that this is a time to stand up for ourselves and not allow anyone to bully us ever, right? And if this is the first letter to be sent to a church, if this was my church, I would definitely make the first one the strongest one and not cave into anything. Like, if like it was in the message, if they're threatening this and say, "Give me back all my offering," I would not. I would be the one. I would rather spend the money to scare them off, right? And I would go full Braveheart on this situation. What does that mean? The message said, forgive, but do not tolerate their deeds. That's this week's Sunday message, right? You can forgive them, but do not tolerate their deeds. And I think there's a fine line of forgiving and just letting people do whatever they want. And I think that's not going to help people anyways, but they need to know what they're doing has consequences too. Now, I thought to myself, am I being too harsh? Am I really being too harsh? And I'm just thinking to you guys can comment about this. Am I being too harsh about this? But someone actually told me that, like, oh, this Braveheart, like I'm going Braveheart is like, yeah, I'm gonna stand and be courageous. And then they told me about, they're talking about the speech that Braveheart gave, and I went back into the speech, and when I looked up the speech that Braveheart gave before they went into battle against the English. One second. Excuse me. So when I went back into that, I read it and it was inspiring. It says like, I fight and you may die, run and you'll live at least a while. And dying in your beds many years from now, would you be willing to trade all the days from this day to that for one chance? Just one chance to come back here and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom. You know what I mean? So when you read that, it's like, oh, I just want to take up a sword and like go into battle with Braveheart and such. But when I read that, I was like, oh, it's a powerful thing that we need to stand up for ourselves right now. But I like how Sansim said it. Forgive, but do not tolerate their deeds. And I think that is the key thing. We can forgive, right? But if they're like, think about all the damage that has been done to Providence over the last five months. That's a lot of damage. People leaving, the slandering and the public opinion on Providence. There's just so many things that have happened. We've lost a lot of good friends. People have been influenced. All these things have happened. Forgiving. Yes, we can forgive, but do not tolerate their deeds. We need to show them like, yeah, we forgive you, but there is a consequence to every action that you take. And I think that's something that we really, really need to discern between, right? And I was thinking to myself that's exactly what I would do. That's what I would do. Send a message. This is not right. We forgive you, but we're not going to tolerate any of this anymore, kind of thing. So you guys can comment if you think I'm a bit too harsh, but that's just my feeling right now. And maybe I'm just riding the wave of the protests, but that's how I feel we need to stand up for ourselves, kind of thing. And if those of you guys don't know, they made an announcement that Providence is going to sue Netflix in Korea. And for me, this just sounds great. Even if the lawsuit doesn't go through, it's us standing up for ourselves, right? The lawsuit will be based on the forensics reports that were done on the recorded audio that was in Netflix. That was never, like, even the forensics said it's not reasonable to trust in it without the original audio, and yet they still played it on the Netflix series, a documentary, right? Which is a joke if they think it's a documentary. So many missteps that they have. So I think it's just another step for Providence to stand up and restore Sansim's name. I am super happy that all these things are happening. Just having that attitude that we have to be kind, we have to love each other, but part of love is standing up for ourselves too and not letting people push us around or bully us, right? Not even the government, not even the judicial system. And for me, it's not so much like that I'm thinking we're going to win all these lawsuits. It's not so much that. It's the fact that we're standing up, right? Like, don't you think that is the most powerful thing is we are standing up for what we believe in. And, don't think that you can just come over here and bully us and say all these things that we're going to just cave in. Oh, you sent a threat to sue us? All right, well, let's get into it. We'll put all our money in. Let's put all of our chips in, right? Let's see if you guys are bluffing or not. And let's get into this. So that's something that I personally would rather do. That's what I would rather do. But I'm not sure about you guys. And like I said, you guys can comment about this. But it's very exciting for me to see all these things developing, right? So yeah, guys, write down what you guys think about all that's happening. And I'm sure, think about the smaller countries. Like even I'm in Canada right now. There's not a lot of members here. If you look in Europe or like Australia, I mean, even America compared to the size of the country and the population, most of the Western countries, there's not like huge presence of Providence. So obviously there's not going to be this public scrutiny because it's a waste of time for the news and such for them to be bothering these groups that are so small. You know what I mean? So but when you get to see Korea, one of the things I like about when I see Korea is I like to see what our future is going to be like. And what that means is because they're fully developed, they're way more developed than any other country in Providence. And to see how they're dealing with it and how they rise up and stand, it inspires that, hey, when the time comes, we're going to do the same thing. And by the time it becomes huge and big and we're going to have our public opinions against us in, like, say, countries like America and Canada and Europe and stuff like that, by that time, Korea will be even way more advanced, right? Where they will set the condition, the foundations for us not to go through those difficult times, right? Because if Korea, they are able to clean up everything, the public opinion, and Sun Sim is gonna, he's gonna be absolved from all the differences of the past and all the lawsuits and such. That would be powerful, because then when they point, like when we say we're attached to Providence in Korea, CGM and stuff, they're going to see that it's a clean sheet, or they went through injustice, but they pushed through and they were able to overcome, and they'll look at other countries more favorably. The only reason why a lot of us are looked at unfavorably, because when they do look up CGM and Sunsteam that's happening in Korea, they all see the slander and stuff like that too, and then that looks bad upon us, right? So that's why I think that, Korea going ahead, setting the foundation is such a powerful thing, and it's something that we really need to open our eyes, open our hearts to in a better way. So that is something that I was thinking about, and hope that it's something that you guys will realize also. Okay, so there it is. That's that. It's just exciting for me. It's very, very exciting to see all these things happening, and I hope it's something that's exciting you also. Leave your comments below. All right, so let's get into our first break of the day. right, so let's get into it. Let's get into today's Q&A Thursday. We have two big questions, and I hope that you guys will really, really enjoy this. The first question is asking about, this is from New York. This is Mark over there in New York. And he says, what are some tips on how to create a spiritual atmosphere when going out into a public setting? Some of the guys at our church are going to a baseball game on Friday, and two newcomers are coming along. One of the guys in the group asked, how can we create a spiritual atmosphere for this event? And then he said, I thought about it, and the only thing that comes to mind is casually, passively sharing the word, but I'm wondering what else we could do. Thanks. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. I have two thoughts on this, right? Like how to create a spiritual atmosphere. Now, creating, like the word create, to create a spiritual atmosphere is an interesting concept because like when you're going into a country like America, there's freedom of religion, right? You're freely able to worship and do whatever you want when it comes to your religion, right? As long as you're not infringing on other people's rights. And this is like in most of the Western countries. But the concept of creating, I think it's a hard thing because creating is different than natural. Personally, I like natural, right? Unless it's like a real church event, which means, are we trying to create something that is unnatural? Are we trying to do something for the sake of just signaling to the people around us that we are spiritual or Christians or we have faith? Or should it be about the way that we normally live? Like for instance, when it comes to religious freedom, when you're inside a church, there is a norm inside that church, and you're able to be more open to expressing your faith and beliefs because that's the time and place to do it. However, in a public setting, we are not going to do the exact same thing that we do inside of a church, right? It's not like in the middle of the baseball game, everyone just starts standing up and starts praising and brings the guitar and they start praising in the middle of a baseball game. That's just, it's against common courtesy, and you're kind of, you're there. It's the wrong place and time. You're in the middle of a baseball game. It does, and this is a very extreme example, right? So religious freedom does not mean we can do all of our acts and deeds like we do inside of a church on the outside, right? Like there's a common courtesy that there is, right? Because then if that was the case, then you'd have Buddhists, Catholics, Muslims, Shinto, Orthodox, all doing their things in public. No, the freedom is for us to freely worship in our temples, churches, and homes, and in public, but not infringing on other people's, other people's rights. Or, it's just totally against what the event or the time and place is, right? The public space is for everyone to feel safe and free to do what we want, right? So there is acceptable in public and what is not. So when you're in public, yeah, we're not, like we would all agree, you're not going to shout at people that they're going to hell or you got to believe in Jesus. That's completely unacceptable, right? Also, you don't want to be interrupting events and public spaces with spontaneous and loud praises, prayer, or sermons, because there's a time and place for everything, right? It's not gonna be infringing on other people's, like their right to just live a comfortable life, whatever it is, right? So it's like, you're not there to, like, you're not going to do it in the middle of a wedding. You're not going to do it in the middle of a baseball game. Like, these are other things. Like, yeah, that's true. Like, we're not going to be those things either. And that's why we actually ask these questions, because we're thinking about, what would be a right way to do it? The things we can do, which is normal, not bothering anyone else, is like, say, praying before you eat. I've seen plenty of times that even when I was in church in the former faith, we go to dinner outside and, there'd be 4 or 5 of us and one person would pray for the whole table before they ate. And that's normal, right? That's not something that's like people are going to be offended, like, oh, how dare you pray in public? No, you can pray in public, right? Someone can, I remember even in university, when you have Christian clubs, which is normal. And those Christian clubs would have a booth day. And at the booth, they would sing praises with the guitar. Yeah, because it's a time and place for it. It's a booth to attract people who want to come to God, right? And I think that, even praying before you eat, talking about church, talking about God as you normally do is fine. But to create, like to quote unquote create, I think it can become disingenuous. Like, I would say it could, like, if you go too extreme or too far, I'm not sure the word fake is right, but disingenuous, like, it would be on the same level as, like, virtue signaling. You know how like we talk about when the woke companies do virtual signaling, like they kind of put a sign on their door saying we accept these types of people, right? But that's all they do. They're just signaling to people that you like we are woke and we support you, but they don't really do anything else about it, right? Which means like signaling to people that you are a Christian or a believer, you have faith, but you may not do that in your regular life. I think it could seem and come off as disingenuous. So my thing would be, I would say being natural, what you normally do, and time and place is important. Like, I'm not sure what it means to create a spiritual atmosphere at a baseball game. You know what I mean? Like, does that mean that whenever there's a home run, thank you, Jesus, I love you, Jesus, Jesus, you gave us the home run? Like, is that natural? I don't know if that's natural. Like, is that creating a spiritual atmosphere? Like, usually when we'd have events, even sports, we would gather first before we left to the baseball game. We would pray together, or before you go into the stadium, you pray together and say, "Hey guys, let's have a great time and let's bring God into it with us." And, it becomes a very natural thing that you pray before, and no one's going to bug you because there's crowds around you, and you guys get in a circle and you pray together for a great time. And then you go into the stadium and, you do what you naturally do. Like for instance, for me, when I go with the campus guys, it's pretty much like a bunch of dudes hanging out, playing foosball and cards and games. And while we're hanging out, we talk to each other naturally about many subjects, but we don't force a subject, right? We talk about prayer, we talk about life, we talk about providence, we talk about this and that, but it's very, very natural. And I would say that we're not intentionally trying to create, but we're being who we are, right? And we talk about what we really want to talk about. And when, and naturally the conversations get deep. And when it gets deep, we're not there trying to signal to each other who we are. We're there because we're genuinely asking, what do you think about this? Hey, I'm struggling with this. What do you think about this? And the only people that we're trying to show ourselves to is between us and God. Right? And we're genuinely, the kids, I call them kids because they're less than half my age. They genuinely ask real questions that they're struggling with or that they're really curious about, right? And that's what and that's as natural as it gets for me, right? And like I said, creating a spiritual atmosphere, it depends on the time and place and the event you go to. Like I said, you're going to a baseball game, right? You're going, and I think it would be kind of weird. Like, let me go extreme again. That you go to watch a game, and you go to a baseball game, and you don't watch the game at all, and all you do is talk about God the whole time, and talk, and you're asking all the people around you, do you believe in Jesus? Do you believe in God? Do you believe in this? Like, that just becomes annoying to everyone around you, right? But you know what? I can understand if you don't really watch the game and just talk to people about other stuff, because, you're in New York. You have the Yankees and the Mets, and both of those teams suck. So, yeah, I can understand if you're not watching the game. No, both of those teams are terrible. I'm like, yeah, I can see how you guys are not going to watch the game. But, yeah, like I say, personally speaking, I wouldn't go beyond what is natural. But it's okay to have something there. Like something you put in, like something fun, because you're at a baseball game. It's a fun time. It's entertainment. And you could do something like, have some type of game that goes on during that time. I don't know. There's a bunch of different things, but I would say that it would just don't go into something that is disingenuous. Like, it's beyond what is natural and beyond the time and space that you're in, like in a baseball game. Like, I would say that the purpose there is not to be spiritual. You know what I mean? Like, it's not there to do spiritual things like inside of a church, which means you do things that is natural, normal for that time and setting. And yeah, like, I've been to a baseball game in America too, and the game's like 3 hours, and I'm probably talking for 2. Like, you're not watching the game all the time. There's a lot of people just talking and eating. And like, you're not going to just sit there and bust out a Bible study in the middle of it, right? But it's a baseball game. So I think you guys should think about what to do that will make it natural and normal, but not trying to force like spirituality into something that is not necessary. Because when it becomes unnatural, it's a little bit awkward too. It really is. So I would say my way of doing it would be a little bit more natural. I don't mind praying before we go to the game or even outside the stadium. And when it finishes, that's fine too. And I don't think that's something like saying that you're ashamed of your faith or anything. It's just natural and normal. It's just what normal people do, right? Even of faith, right? So I think that, that's kind of how I would handle it. Creating sometimes can be disingenuous. Sometimes, not all the time, right? Sometimes can be disingenuous, all right? So that's question number one. Question number two is asking, is there a different formula used within the same chapter when it comes to age calculation in the Bible? So in the book of Genesis, few main characters were said to live till 400 to 900 years old. And I was told it is to divide by 12 moon cycles. But the Bible said they have sons at 45 years old. And when we divide by 12, they would be kids having kids, right? So example is Enosh was 90 years old. He became the father of Kenan. After the birth of Kenan, Enosh lived another 815 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Enosh lived 905 years, and then he died. When Kenan was 70 years old, he became the father of Mahalalel. After the birth of Mahalalel, Kenan lived another 840 years, and he had other sons and daughters. Kenan lived 910 years, and he died. When Mahalalel was 65 years old, he became the father of Jared, right? After the birth of Jared, Mahalalel lived another 830 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And Mahalalel lived 895 years, and then he died. When Jared was 162 years old, he became the father of Enoch. Okay, so from the above, if we use the division by 12, then does it make sense to have a kid at 5.8 years old and 7 years old, right? If you were to divide everything by moons, right? So this is actually something Sunseem talked about a while back, and Sunseem actually was angry at a certain point because there were he was like, basically what he said is he said that what he realized about the 12 moon cycles was only for the time of Noah. So this calculation of moons will only work for Noah's time, but not for the other times, right? So, some of us will be like, oh, okay, so that makes sense because what he realized was only for the time of Noah, right? So then the question comes in is like, well, what about all the other times? Or it's kind of convenient that you only realize for this one moment, but it doesn't matter for other moments, right? Were they all using different calendars, right? So there's a couple things that we need to know to understand this properly and well. A couple things we need to know about calendars is like even the current calendar we have, which is a Gregorian calendar, is only 400 years old. So even the calendar, the very detailed calendar we have right now is very, very young, right? So the thing we need to understand is the way we measure time has changed throughout history. Like, we have BC and AD. They're the best known ways of measuring time in the Western world. However, this system has only existed since the Middle Ages, right? So, AD and BC is from the Middle Ages. So how did other people measure time before this? So you look at ancient cultures, they chose to number their years beginning from an event that was considered to be most significant in their history of religion. Like, for example, the AD-BC system is based around the supposed date of the birth of Jesus Christ, as this was considered to be a significant event, right? But other people and groups believed different events and had similar importance and based their systems around them. Examples would be like the Roman calendar started counting years from the date that was thought to be the original year that the city of Rome was founded. And this is why the Roman system, they had something called the AUC system. And it's a Latin phrase, like I don't even know what the AUC means, but it means from the founding of the city. So the ancient Romans believed that a legendary figure called Romulus created Rome in 753 BC, right? And it was from this date that they started numbering their years. So when you say that like Julius Caesar was assassinated in 44 BC, the Romans would have said he was killed in the year 710 AUC, right? So when you see like the calendars, they're very different. Like even in ancient Greece, each of the individual city-states Athens, Sparta, Thebes had their own individual calendars that often measured time differently from each other, which made it like extremely confusing, right? So you see, like the reason I bring this point up is because we see that time is not something that was calculated or was considered even that important. Not that it wasn't important, but it was calculated in so many different ways. Now, what does that have to do with calculating age? Well, even ages, if time was constantly, time was calculated differently at different times and different starting points, then you're going to see that, that ties into the individuals also, that age wasn't as big, right, as something that people were looking into, right? So like if I told you 3 different methods of calculating people's ages, right? Number 1 is what Sansi talked about is moons, right? Like there's a number of moons per year. You can add them up and get a year, which is mostly wrong and leads to strange seasons, right? So there's one way is calculating moons. Other ways is natural phenomenon. So people in the past would calculate age by, say, floods. Every year you get a flood at around the same time, therefore a year has passed, right? Or some people would say, oh, winter. Winter has come, so you've survived 1 winter, 2 winters, 3 winters, something along that line. And the last one, which is quite interesting, is stars. Right, that's where it gets really interesting, right? So you stargaze and get the idea that the same constellations can be seen again and again after a given time. So you build the place with some exact places, stones, or whatnot, right, to show your age, right? So you see that it's very, very different, like how ages were calculated in different regions, or even in the same region but different, like cities or whatever it is, right? Or the same countries but different cities. If we go even more deeper, let's get into birthdays. Right? When did birthdays actually become like really celebrated? And it was from the beginning of industrialization, right? They say probably within the 19th century, like the 1860s or something along that line, did middle-class Americans commonly start celebrating birthdays, right? Like it's the idea that everyone should celebrate their birthday is not an old thing. It's very new. It's like 100 years, like 150 years old. That concept of celebrating birthdays is not something that you have to celebrate every birthday. Know your age is not something that people really, really celebrated until recent in history, right? And it's not even until the early 20th century where birthday celebrations became a tradition nationwide, even in America. It wasn't nationwide. So the 19th century is when it started, but the early 20th century where it became nationwide as a tradition to celebrate your birthdays. Like here's something very interesting. Like when you go back 500 years, like to the 1500s, or like go to the medieval times. The medieval times is very interesting because there was celebration of birthdays, right? However, who celebrated birthdays? It was lords and nobility. It was considered a privilege to celebrate your birthday for the rich. Why? Think about it. It makes sense. Everyone else is just trying not to die. Why would they care about birthdays? Birthdays is a sign of privilege, right? That's why we're living in such a privileged society right now. Because everyone celebrates their birthday and you expect presents and you expect all these things. But if you look just 150 years, remember, this wasn't even nationwide tradition until the early 20s, which means the early 1900s. So 100 years ago is when this actually really started for everyone to celebrate their birthdays every single year. But birthdays and age did not become as important as it is today, right? Because people were dying. There's bubonic plague, Spanish influenzas. There's like a bunch of things where people are dying, where people are more worried about just surviving than trying to calculate their actual age, right? So when we think about it, like even the time of Noah and the time of Adam, that's 1,600 years apart. There's the reason why it's only calculated for the time of Noah because it's probably there was a different way of calculation, right? But the one thing we can say is, as time moves on in the Bible, the ages get younger and younger, and this is where you'll have the calendars that become more and more used by the people back then, where the ages become more similar to our ages or even younger. right? So what we know is that ages are calculated differently at each time. There's no exact way of knowing how each and every person at each time was actually calculating their ages. But what we do know, it wasn't even really that important. For people who are just trying to start, it wasn't even important to celebrate their birthdays. So the case of Noah, calculating by moons, is actually a sign that the people in the, just understanding that, even at Noah's time, he wasn't really 600 years old. Okay. And that should be a sign to everyone reading the Bible that in the Old Testament, they're not as old as it literally says, right? And it's something for us to realize how we believe and how sometimes we just literally believe too easily, right? And then now we're thinking that people live to like 900 and almost 1,000 years old, which doesn't really make sense when you look at how we are now, how medicine is so much better now, right? And how we live right now, we can barely reach 100, right? We barely reach 100. Like you look in the very, the healthiest societies like Japan or something like that, and they're living to 85, right? The average is 85 for life expectancy. No one's even reaching 100, right? It's very rare for people to actually reach 100. And personally, for myself, I don't even want to reach 100. I don't like to be to be that decrepit and old and not unhealthy and stuff. I just don't want to reach that level, right? But it's a sign for us to understand, time is something that is valued differently, right? So as we see with calendars, as we see of counting of ages, and it's not as important as we think it is. Yes, we're like, that's interesting. Noah was this age when this happened. That's interesting. And it is interesting, but it's just showing us that they didn't really live that old. Like that should be the key thing. Yeah, these people are not living till 900. They're not living to 600, 700, whatever it is. They're not, right? And that should be the key point. But if we were to... if you heard from someone that all the ages in the Old Testament are calculated by moons, by the moon cycle, then that would be wrong too. Because Sunseem said it was only for the time of Noah and that's it. Only for the time of Noah that he realized, right? Because like we said, as time moves on, or the regions that are made or moved, they're going to have different calculations for age also. So I wouldn't get too deep into it, but just the key point would be, they're not having babies at 5 and 7. No, they're not. Like that's like impossible, right? They need to hit puberty first. And I'm sure even like these young children that are having, like back in the past, you'd have like girls having babies at 12 and 13 years old. Like that's why they even said Jesus's mother Mary was probably like in her teens, right? Like, after they have their period, it's a sign that they're able to have babies. And back then, it's not like today, but back then they would be having babies right away, right? They'd be having babies right away. So I think it's something that it's a good question. And just to make that clear is Sunseem realized the calculation of age only for Noah's time, and that's it, right? All the other times, there's like spaces and gaps, different regions, and you might think, they might have different types of calculations too. But the key point would be, no, these people are not living to that age. They're not living to that age, right? And it shouldn't be something where we're sitting there trying to calculate every single person one by one. We don't have to go into that either. So I hope that really helps you helps you out also with the calculation of ages. All right. So there it is, guys. That is today's Q&A Thursday. Hope you guys really, really enjoyed it. If you have any more questions, leave a comment below. All right. So let's move into our second break of the day.
We believe in the same God, but we are on different levels.
Put your hands in the sky if you feel alive. All the stories that we made, just you and I. Never losing all the passion. All this love is my obsession. Oh my gosh, this feeling got me heat stroke. His love like a billion pots about to heat though. I ain't never breaking from this bond, cause you and I are only one. If you ain't living with the Lord, then who you with? Who you with? If you ain't living with the Lord, then who you with? You with? You get together with the Lord every day, all day. You get together with the Lord all day, all day. You get together with the Lord every day, all day. You get together with the Lord all day, all day. Together love as we stop and just stare. My eyes only on you, they sparkle with love, don't forget my charm too. There will never be another, live this life only for you. I give you this promise that I will hold true.
If you ain't living with the Lord, then who you with?
Who you with? Who you with? Who you with?
If you ain't living with the Lord, then who you with?
Who you with? Hey.
주와 함께 together with the Lord every day, all day. 주와 함께 together with the Lord all day, all day. 주와 함께 together with the Lord every day, all day. 주와 함께 together with the Lord all day, all day.
We believe in the same God, but we are on different levels.
Okay, so let's move into the final segment for today. And every Thursday we do have Sermons in the Sky. Unfortunately, I couldn't do one last week because I was recording way too late. It was like, by the time I finished the second segment, I was already like, I had like, I think like 18 minutes before the before the podcast had to be uploaded. And I just didn't have enough time because I had to edit and do other stuff too. But this week, I am able to do so. So yes, Sermons in the Sky is back, and I hope you guys will really enjoy this time where I'm able to, just kind of work on my sermon and my preaching because I'm not pastoring anymore. I'm not a head leader anymore. And it's just interesting, right? For me to keep my speaking chops up to date so that when the time comes for me to start preaching again, I will not be like starting from the beginning again, okay? So let's get into today's Sermons in the Sky. So I was listening to this podcast, and this podcast was interviewing a retired colonel of the U.S. Army. And he's making his rounds in the podcast world, and he's kind of giving everyone the reality of what is really happening with the Russia-Ukraine war, right? And he has all his contacts in the army. He's way high up there, so he knows a lot of people, and he knows what's going on. And the interesting thing was, it was quite shocking when he talked about the reality of the Ukraine war is nothing close to what we are hearing and seeing in the news. So one of the things that really shocked me, he was talking about the death toll. And, in the news, we keep hearing that, Russia's being pushed back and the Ukrainians are on their offensive and the Russians are falling back here and this is happening and that is happening, the Wagner group and this, the Russians, they're in for a really big surprise kind of thing, right? And he said, deaths in Russia so far, like remember guys, we're on like day 550. So this war is almost pushing 2 years now, right? And it's like 550 days of this war. And he says, Russian deaths is about 40 to 50,000 casualties of soldiers. And we're like, I'm like, what? Only 40 to 50,000? That's crazy. Like we're looking in, like we thought from the news, it's like in the hundreds of thousands. And then the question was, what about Ukraine? What is the death toll of Ukraine soldiers? And he said the Ukraine army is decimated. It's like around 400,000 deaths in the Ukraine army. So think about this. 10 times more Ukrainians are being killed than Russians. And he was saying that, the hospitals are full. They don't have enough beds. And contrary to what the news is telling you, Russia actually treats like the Ukrainian soldiers that surrender, they treat them really well. So well that Ukrainian units surrender to Russia because they know they'll be treated well. And they have no choice because most of their units are injured from battle. They can't fight on, so they would rather surrender. And they also know that on top of that, they know that they will eventually be exchanged for Russian soldiers later, so they're okay. And most of them speak Russian too. And I was listening to this like, this is so different than what I was reading and seeing on the news. And this colonel was saying, do not believe what you hear and see. This war is already done. He says the Russians are inevitably going to, They're not just sitting there like the colonel was saying. Basically, if they wanted to, they can crush it right now, but they don't want to. They don't want to crush everyone because this is considered for them their own people. This is a big thing between Russia and NATO right now. And they say Russia has so much control of the war. They're taking it slow and they're watching to see what the US and NATO does. So this colonel was saying, yeah, and Russia, they have 300,000 soldiers ready to go to war, but they're not going into war, right? They're waiting to see if NATO will get involved. And once NATO gets involved, they will bring in the 300,000 soldiers that are waiting, right? And he was saying, like he was talking about, oh yeah, by the way, the US is not as equipped as people think. They're just renewing their equipment, like old equipment. There's nothing new state-of-the-art in tech. Everyone is now very equal in their equipment in weapons, right? And the US is still using older weapons and machines. And on top of it, the morale and mentality of the soldiers is weaker in the US Army than in the past. And I was listening to all these things he's saying. And I was blown away. I'm not sure, like for you guys, doesn't that blow your mind that what this US colonel is saying, this retired US colonel is saying? Like we're at day 550 in the war. And what we believe about this war is so different from what the reality is. And it's because it's based on what we see and what we hear. And that really made me think about this week's scriptures. When you look at, the past weeks, we had the scriptures in Isaiah chapter 11, verses 1 through 5. It talks about the Messiah coming with the Spirit of the Lord resting upon this person, right? But the part that it really made me think about is when from verse 3, it says, he will not judge by what he sees with his eyes or decide by what he hears with his ears. But with righteousness, he will judge the needy. With justice, he will give decisions for the poor of the earth. He will strike the earth with the rod of his mouth. So when we look at this, it's like, wait a second, like, just like that colonel says, don't believe what you see and what you hear, right? And it's the same thing. When the Messiah comes, he does not judge by what he sees with his eyes or what he hears with his ears, right? And it was in this week's message too, right? This week's message too, he's talking about, hey, you think that I look down on you because someone made a bad report? It's like, no, I will not do that. I will check and make sure that everything is checked before I make any decisions or judgment. I will, and it reminded me, it's like, hey, what about us? How much are we swayed by what you see and what you hear compared to what God has promised us, especially in this most difficult time right now? God has promised us many things. God has shown us so many things that is different than what we see and hear today with this spiritual Oppenheimer that's going on right now, where you see like the second in command, goes down and all these people coming against us. Then you have Netflix and these trials and people saying this and that. And we see so much with our eyes. We hear so much with our ears. But what God is telling us is do not be swayed by these things, but focus on what God has promised you. Because when it comes to God's history, it's not as simple as everything works out perfectly. But we only see things coming to fruition at the end. Like if I were to take a look at a story that's perfect, like a perfect example of this is the story of Joseph, loved by God. Joseph truly loved God too. He trusted in and believed in the promise. He trusted that God would take care of him as long as he did what was right. You know what I mean? And I think this is something that we have to think about too. Is remember, he trusted. We have to trust in God as long as we do what is right. Because it's completely different than knowing that you did something wrong, knowing that you thought or did something wrong and then expecting for things to work out. That's completely different. Many times people complain and grumble even when it's them that have done wrong. But Joseph is in a place where he has not done anything wrong and he still trusts in God no matter what happens, right? Think about the situation. Joseph was sold by his own brothers as a servant. Think about that. From what you just saw, you hear your brothers hate you so badly and you're sold off into slavery. And then when you are a servant, you're accused of rape by the master's wife. And then you get thrown into prison. And in prison, you still trust in God. You still do your best. And when people are in need of dreams being interpreted, you still do that for them. And you ask them to remember you, but they forget about you for another 3 years. It took 3 years for them to actually remember, oh, there was a guy named Joseph. Yeah, he's the one who... But in the end, what happens? He becomes a prime minister. He saves his family and, in essence, the entire nation of Israel. He lived like a king. He was second in command. And it all happened at the end. Now imagine if you were in that situation and you see those things and you hear these things, like all these, you see and hear all these things happening to you. Would you be bitter? Would you be so angry that you renounce God? Would you deny everything that God has done for you? And this is kind of the same as what is happening today. We know the promises that God gave to us. We know, we've seen with our eyes and we've heard the word and we've seen the miracles and the signs that have happened. And if you think about it, it's enough for us to believe and trust in God. Even though everything around us looks like it's wrong. Right? All these things are bad and like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen here? Even though it looks like it's the worst situation, God is not forsaking us. And we have to be those that trust in the promise that God gave to us. We need to reach that level of faith that just like the Messiah, we're supposed to be Christ-like, that we need to reach that level of faith that we're not judging this history by what we see and what we hear around us. We're not judging our brothers and sisters by what we see and what we hear. We're not going to be those that make the same mistakes of people in the past who left, right? Like the Judas Iscariots, like the King Sauls, right? The ones that distrusted and thought to them, oh, this is not right. Oh my gosh, Samuel's not here. I've got to do the sacrifice on my own. We have to remember the promise. Just like the scriptures say in Isaiah chapter 11, verse 3, do not judge by what you see with your eyes or decide by what you hear with your ears, but with righteousness judge the needy. With justice give decisions for the poor of the earth. Right? Righteousness must be our belt. Faithfulness, the sash around our waist. We cannot be swayed by the things that we see and the things that we hear, but we have to hold on to God's promise, knowing that this is the history of God. How do we know it's the history of God? From everything we've heard, all the words, seeing Sunseem's life, all the things that we've seen of him. We have to trust in that promise. All right? So there it is, guys. That is today's Sermons in the Sky. Hope you guys really enjoyed that and it kind of give you perspective on what is happening right now. Hope you guys will have an amazing and awesome Thursday. And guess what, guys? Tomorrow's Friday. It's going to be an awesome day, all right? So everyone, enjoy the rest of your Thursday. We'll see you guys again tomorrow on the Morning Star Drive on 117.8.
It's the Morning Star Drive 117.8. You soaring up with sky, now's the time, don't delay. I'm sitting in my ride and it's time to fly. So let's realign, just listen and fill your mind.
I'm burning with desire and the passion. Nobody can stop me when I'm